And maybe someone has already taken part in some events. Patrick, you had one this past Friday.
Yes, we had a meditation event that went great on last Friday. We all relaxed and went mindful into the weekend. So that was really great. Hello from Belgium and from France and everywhere. It's really nice to see people joining in from everywhere.
And that is what it's also about, right? With being online, it's much easier to jump in and join.
Yes, exactly.
Spontaneous, joining fun stuff. Yeah, I just posted 30 minutes ago on LinkedIn if anyone had some spare time and wanted to join. So maybe we got some last minute people joining in as well.
Yeah, I think there was actually 2 people that signed up in the last minutes. So
Cool.
So people are coming in. It's good. So I can also say that this event, as you all know, is hosted by Dandy People, and Agile is a part of the Agile20Reflect Festival. So if you want to see any more sessions or meetings, you can go into agile20reflect.org and look at the calendar. And you can also go directly to dandypeople.com and see our events on our site that we host and that this is a part of. And we also adhere to the community policies of Agile20Reflect, which you can view at Agile20Reflect homepage. And if you have any questions during Carsten's presentation, please put them in the chat and we'll answer them afterwards.
Hopefully, at least.
Yeah, we answer as many as possible. Otherwise, they can find you on your YouTube channel or anything, Carsten?
Yeah, or LinkedIn.
Yeah.
That's also a good chance of finding me there.
So now we got almost 70 people in.
Yes.
And it's 11 o'clock.
That's quite amazing, to be honest.
Yeah.
It is.
71 participants right now.
Yeah. I'm really looking forward to learn more about this, Carsten.
Me too.
Now they're dropping in.
Should we slowly get started or just give it 1 or 2 minutes more?
I think we can give it 2 minutes more because there's a lot of people dropping in now.
Cool.
Make sure everyone has their coffee and everything.
I can see, Carsten, that you're really skilled in drawing on your iPad there.
Yeah, I won't say I'm good at it, but I'm having fun, and that's quite important, at least.
It looks good, and if you're having fun, it usually turns out well as well.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, it looks really good.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning, Scott. How is Scotland?
It's got snow, and I think it's been sent by Sweden. Thank you, Sweden.
You're welcome.
We got plenty here, so yeah. Help yourself.
Now we're soon up in 100.
Patrick, maybe we should start. It's 2 minutes past.
Yes, we can start. I would just say once again that this is an event that will be recorded. So as I told you before, if you don't want the risk of your face or anything being in the video, you can turn your video off, but we would really love to have it on for you guys. And I'm going to hand this event over to Carsten Lützen and let him take it away.
Thank you. Then I'll stop doodling again. Okay, so welcome to this talk. and I'm going to spend a little less than an hour or so on liberating structures and on of my learnings on how I used it to facilitate setting team goals. This specific session that I will walk through is, I used that on a leadership team, but I've also used it on development teams and stuff like that. The mechanics are somewhat the same, but I will get back to that. And maybe in the end, you will actually, you should go back to this initial slide and then see how many of the structures are actually represented in here, because most of the agenda is shared in this picture, but I will not spoil that just yet. The agenda for today, it is not because I've not prepared anything, it's just because I don't want to spoil everything, as I said. So first off, I'll just give a brief introduction to who am I, for those of you that don't know me. And then I'll just going to dive a bit into the liberating structures and what is liberating structures and what is all this about. Then some background about this specific case, just to give you some context. Who were the participants? How did I set up the day and stuff like that. Then I'm going to go a bit more or a lot more into the details of the day, and I'll get back to what strings mean in a liberating context area. But I'll go through the string that I made and used, and all the stuff in the agenda, both before and after this string. And then I'm going to hopefully give some kind of recap and some reflection together with all of you, and then some questions in the end. And as Patrick said, if you have questions during the talk, just write them in the chat. I'll try to keep my eye on the chat and answer what fits in. And if you feel that I've forgotten your question, just repost it or raise your hand at the end in the Q&A. Cool. A bit about me. So my name is Carsten Lützen. I'm an agile coach, or whatever we call it at the moment, at the Lego Group here in Denmark. I am an agile coach by title, but I also do a lot of other stuff. My primary incentive is to work on whatever adds the most value. And at the moment, I get a lot of energy from this, so this is where I focus my time. You can find me on YouTube if you have not seen my YouTube channel. It's called Carsten Lützen or Lützen. I share a weekly clip of a technique, of sometimes liberating structures, sometimes content, and it's just a spare time hobby of mine. So yeah, feel free to go there, and you can find a lot of info also on these structures that I'm going to go through today. And I'm married, I have a wife, 2 kids. At the Lego Group, I facilitate our Scrum Master network because I am a former Scrum Master, and before that I was a computer developer. With my background is a computer scientist, so it's not really that soft skill based, but it gives me a lot of energy. And sorry if any dad joke sneaks in. I have a fond love of dad jokes, so there might be some stupid puns along the way. Sorry in advance. Anyway, so a bit of background on this case. I'll just share a bit here. So for this specific event, I had been talking with an HR partner for some time, saying that I really think that this leadership team should try to act more of what we call an agile team and not just as a working group. The problem is that with travel bans and stuff like that, it is a distributed team, so everything had to be online. So the session was completely facilitated online. None of these, of course, all of this I will show can also be done physically in the room, but I did it online, so that can definitely work. And due to the online thingy, it was distributed. We had people from both from Denmark and London and other countries join in. So there are also some cultural differences, not that much between Denmark and London, but still we need to cater for those differences. And since it's a leadership team, I think the politically polite way of doing it, of saying it, is that we have many different personalities in the team. Some are really fond of hearing their own voice. Some are more quiet and will say something after they have been spending some time reflecting and just, does this feel right? Is this actually what I want to say? And then they will speak out their mind, but you often know that when they do, they have thought it through. And the size of this team was, at that point in time, 8 to 10. And it was ranging from vice presidents, some senior directors, and directors. And I was graciously given 3.5 hours to to achieve this desired outcome. And the goal was nothing shorter of, so the team wanted to find concrete goals, because they were just a working group, and they wanted to find concrete goals that were actionable, that they could work on to improve the entire department. And we had 3.5 hours to, first of all, find these goals, start off this working, and then present what we have done. So it was not, to be honest, not a lot of time, but I thought we can do something about it, but let's see how it went. And my initial reaction to this was, I think I need to be creative. And there are some brilliant people, the Liberators. If you don't know them, check them out. And I've talked quite a lot with them, and they've mentioned these liberating structures. And I've attended some of their workshops and thought, this is actually quite cool, but maybe I need to look a bit more into it, because this would probably be a quite good fit. So that was my initial idea, and I tried and go with that. So the real question was then, because these are very important people and we need to make sure that we don't waste their time. So how was I actually going to do this was one of the questions I got beforehand. So before we go into this more specific things of how I did it, let's just look a bit at liberating structures, why I thought this was actually going to be a good idea. So if we have two axes here, we have one axis which is up here, many in control of content, and down here, one in control of content. And we have one sharing actions, one shaping the actions, and we have many shaping the actions. Then what I'm doing right now, that was the eraser, not the pen. What I'm doing right now is definitely down here. I'm doing a presentation. I'm the only one speaking. I can hear my own voice. So it's only me that is in control of the content. It's only me that is shaping the actions. And we can stay down here for a shorter period of time, but probably not for 3.5 hours. And we will definitely not get the content or the outcomes that we wanted. Let's say that we had an open discussion, for instance. It would probably be up here, because it's still in an open discussion, unless we are just talking everybody at once. It's only one person talking at the time, but it's still many in control of the content, because I could say something, Patrick could then say something, Henrik could say something, and so on. If we do a brainstorm, we are a bit further down, because then we have a topic in advance already defined, but we're still over here. So the question is really, how do we create something that is with many shaping the actions? How do we create something more, I won't necessarily say democratic, but how can we engage more people at the same time? And that is where liberating structures come in. And they're usually put over here, because they provide some quite nice structures, well-described structures for how to actually engage larger groups of people in good and constructive ways. And we don't need to be that creative, because they have done a tremendous job in creating 33 different LS structures that we can mix and match as we see fit. And it's just trying to play around with them and get familiar with them. But for me, at least, taking the first jump into using liberating structures, that took some time. And as I said, a liberating structure is, I usually think of it just as a card. And this card, this structure, it has some input. So what goes into this? Of course, when we plan something, we have a goal in mind that we really want to use. We also need to have a room. It can either be physically or digitally. And we also need to have some participants. And all this is spelled or is written on these liberating structures. So it gives us an idea of, will this structure actually fit us, or will it not fit this specific context? And then at the end, we will of course have some kind of output that might be the final output, or just feed into a new structure or into a new setting. And it varies, of course, from structure to structure, which output is created. And in here is the structure, and that can, of course, be both brainstorming, it can be aligning, it can be building connections, it can be helping each other, it can be counseling, it can be a lot of different things. And one example of this is a structure called 1-2 for all, which is also called, it's also often used as a substructure because it's used in many different structures in different variations or riffs. And the fundamental idea is, if we have a question that we would like to reflect upon in a group, we pose this question first and give people a bit of time just to what was being said, what is the intent, how do I feel about this? And then we start out simply individually to reflect. So what do I feel about this? What is my input to this question? Any reflections, anything I would like to share? And this is to cater for the introverts, because we need some time to reflect before we speak. But of course, extroverts often need, and this is just typically speaking, extroverts often need to have a sounding board where they can then actually start to speak out, because this first part is happening in silence. So that was the one part of this 1-2 for all. In the 2 part, by the way, this is 1 minute. In the 2 part, we then pair up. Now the introverts have had some time to reflect in silence. The extroverts are now ready to try their opinion, and the introverts can kind of also check if their opinions is completely different. How did we actually understand the question? That is 2 minutes in pairs. And again, just self-organizing. Don't create big groups, just pick the person that is closest to you, and then that is a pair. When we have then spent 2 minutes in these pairs, we go to the 4 part of it, which is, as I guess most of you have guessed already, where 2 pairs meet up and then reflect. So what did you discuss in your pair? And then we have 4 minutes for that. In this way, we build some confidence in the participants. We build some trust in that this is actually okay, and my opinion is not far out. So people with not that fond of speaking in bigger crowds can practice saying it to just their partner or the smaller group. And then when we have had these 4 groups of 4, we do a debrief with all the other constellations in the room, because we probably have more of these that have been going on. And then we do a shared debrief, and that is the all step. And this is as much time as needed. And it might not be all groups saying something, but it can be. If we then go to this concept of strings in general is just a sequence of these liberating structures. And I made a string for this session that was, of course, how I saw the day, but often we also prepare some alternative strings, because it might be that I have one idea of where this session needs to go, but when we actually get to the session, it might derail a bit. So I often have some alternative strings ready that we can then use instead to make sure that we at all points in time get the desired outcome. And I plan these sessions often using some kind of cards, liberating structure cards like this, where I can then put them on my table and then play around with them, move them around until I get a string a sequence of events that I'm happy with. For instance, if we are looking at the 1-2 for all, we have a card here, and then on the back side, we have the different steps, the timings, and so on. All of this information is also available on the Liberating Structures website, so you can go there and see it. I just like to have it to play around with. So let's look a bit at how my string looked that day. I have to admit that I started out with some non-liberating structures thingies. So I started out with a simple icebreaker with 3, I'll just say, stupid questions to have people having a laugh. So what is the strangest word you know, or what do you look like when you dance, and something like that. Because even though that they are vice presidents and senior directors, we still need to get them grounded with some fun questions like that. I always go through session rules, also in smaller sessions, smaller workshops. And session rules for me it's super important for me to state that all opinions are welcome, all opinions are okay, and we should not discard an opinion just because we don't agree with it. And I also use the Vegas rule. So what happens in this session stays in this session unless we explicitly agree otherwise, simply to make sure that people feel okay and feel psychologically safe to share what's on their mind without the fear of repercussions. After these session rules, we did some expectation alignment. So what are the best hopes for this session? So if I ask you in 3.5 hours time, what was the best thing about this session? What would you answer? Then we went through that to make sure everything was aligned and everybody agreed on what was going to happen. And for this, we spent around 20 minutes. So it was rather fast paced, but again, given a time slot of 3.5 hours, and the 3.5 hours was also over a lunch break and with a small break sprinkled out. So I didn't have that much time, but I made it work nonetheless. Then we started out with a structure called Conversation Cafe, and this is maybe one of my favorite structures. I will get into the more specifics I think on next slide. And it's a 1 hour managed discussion, or whatever we call it. But it's a quite structured discussion, really catering for people that wanting to talk quite a lot, but also giving time to reflect in silence and discuss what is actually the reason why we're here and this overall question. Then, to make sure that we did not once more over-engineer things, we used another structure called 15% solutions, which is a way to try to help people to focus on what are the things we can actually influence, that we can influence without asking for outside help, funding, more people, and so on, to make sure that it's not another meeting where we meet and then nothing really happens afterwards. Then to kick off these solutions, I used something called Purpose to Practice, where they got into their self-formed groups and spent 1 hour using this structure to kick off their teamwork and making a lot of working agreements to make sure people were aligned on how are we working, why are we working on this, why is this important, and so on. So this was kind of the main string. And then at the end, we did some presentations to share the work that was being done. And I apparently cannot spell right now. Presentations. And from these presentations, we of course had to revisit our best hopes to make sure that if anything was uncovered, that we had a plan on how and when would we make sure that we catered to that best hope that was not fulfilled. So putting up something there, again, to make sure that everybody felt heard and everybody felt that it had been a good session. And because I'm a big fan of feedback, I always end my sessions with some feedback or evaluation of the session, both to the participants or between the participants, but also to me as a facilitator to make sure that I get something to work on. What could have made this session even better, And I will also end the session today with just that. So if you have feedback, then there will be a format for that at the end of the session. And we had 20 minutes for these presentations, 5 minutes to revisit the best hopes, and the feedback was 5 minutes at the end, where they could just write what was on their mind. And some of you might think that this facilitating this online was a super big thing that required a lot of special things. We used Teams, and that was before you could do breakout rooms in Teams. So I had prepared breakout meetings and channels that they could join in these groups for later. I used PowerPoint and had it shared so everybody could edit the PowerPoint at all points in time. When they were going to add content, they could just add it in PowerPoint. PowerPoint is not ideal for this, to be honest, but it works. It can work. And then I did a lot of preparation. So I prepared some templates. I prepared a purpose to practice slide deck for them that they could just fill in the templates and then use that for a presentation later on. I also created the breakout rooms. I ensured that everything was ready, that the people coming up with the initial pitch of the day were ready, and making sure that everything was a well-oiled machine, so we were not wasting a lot of time. I know this is not really necessarily the topic of this talk, but just to give you an idea that it doesn't need to require a lot of fancy software. But I've talked quite a lot now, so let's look a bit at the format for that day. So as I said, the session rules are super important to me. So I always have a slide that looks something like this. So what happens in this session stays in this session unless we explicitly agree otherwise. And this is a safe space. And then, as I said, we moved on to this conversation cafe. And the conversation cafe is basically just 3 rounds of discussion. First off, we will pose the initial questions. And the initial question was something along the lines of, as a leadership team, what are we going to focus on moving forward from this? And we spent a couple of minutes. People were taking some notes, reflection, taking some notes, and just thinking, so what do I really want from this team? Why are we even a team? Are we a team, or should we just be individual head of departments that is not sharing anything or whatever? Then after a couple of minutes, we go into the first round of discussion. And this first round of discussion is quite important because this is your own reflections. But there are some rules, and that is also why I said this is a rather structured approach. And I'll just skip to the next slide. So one of the rules is that we have this virtual talking token. If we were in the room, I would have a ball that we could pass around. But since we're online, I will just mute people if they're speaking and it's not their turn. But the really important thing here is that you get 1 minute to talk uninterrupted. You can, of course, stop before, but you have up to 1 minute to share your initial reflections to this overall question. So 1 minute per person. And when everybody has come with their view of the things or what they want out of this, then we'd go to the second round, and that is comments. So with what you just heard, anything that you would like to comment on, and then again you have up to 1 minute of uninterrupted talking time. You don't need to use it if you don't have any questions or if you don't have any reflections or feedback to what was just being said. You're of course free to just say pass and then pass either physical or virtual ball to another one, just to call out their name and then they unmute. I will take time and I will stop people after 1 minute. I'm quite strict with the format, but people know that and they also accept it. Even the extroverts, because I've said up front, it's 1 minute and I will stop you after that. So they need to be crisp on what they're trying to say. And then the third round of discussion is an open discussion. And this discussion, it depends a bit how long time we take, often 10, 20, maybe even more minutes. And I often ask the team, do you need a talking token here? Or is it okay that everybody can talk when they want? Many teams say, we don't need the talking token. If they say that, I say, I still retain the right to introduce a talking token. If I see somebody dominating the discussion, then I will introduce it and I will enforce it. But if you don't need it, it's completely fine and completely valid. Or if I see somebody hiding, not saying anything, then I will also introduce a talking token again. And I might ask some prompts along the way to make sure that everybody is heard, simply to help people. And that can be a bit terrifying, right? If it's directors and VPs, but in all honesty, right, they're just human people, so they're really great to work with. And then after this open discussion, we go into this, what was your biggest takeaway? Simply to close down this discussion and make sure that people are now somewhat agreeing on in what direction should we take this team. So what are the areas we should focus on? Of course, this exercise did not, and that was not the intent, the intent was not to give a concrete list of actions or a concrete list of topics we could dive into. That is this 15% solution. And then when we had debriefed this, I would bring up a slide and then write down the keywords that were being said to make sure that it was captured somewhere. Then we had a small break, and then we went into this next exercise, which is these 15% solutions. And this is actually quite simple. It's a, wow, that was bold. It's a rather simple question to ask. So with the input we just heard, we just uncovered, what 15% solutions would you think could add value? And when I say 50% solutions, I mean, if we say that our workday is 100%, and you tend to say that roughly 85% of your work is determined up front, and you're only in control of around 15%, what 15% solutions would you then propose? That is solutions that don't require extra funding, doesn't require you more hours, doesn't require you to work overtime. And then individually reflect on that. And they would write it in, yeah, okay, I'll actually get to that. So, and with this, again, just alone, make a list individually. So write it on Post-its or on a notepad or whatever rocks your boat, to just get this way of thinking going. So what could I actually do? Where could I move the needle? Where could I make sure that we evolve as a team? And then small groups, I think it was 3 or 4 people, shared with this and consolidate the list. In this way, we could easily merge things that were the same, so we didn't get a long 5-7 times the number of participants list, but we could slowly start to write things together. And then with this consolidated list, we would present it for the group. And I had prepared for all the in this PowerPoint that everybody could use. I'd prepared a template like this, where I then asked them to go in, fill out the title and the short description. You can see the actual template here. So I just inserted that in PowerPoint, and then they could write a text up in the banner, and then they could insert text in the middle. And then we had all the ideas actually saved there for later. So let's say that we want to revisit this or do focus on other things, then we could just go back to this list. Now we had to vote for what are we going to focus on. And as I said, I tried to keep the setup rather simple. So I used this slide and said, you have 6 votes. We will select the top 3-ish and work with. And you just wrote simply by writing in the chat the title. And then you press enter when I say so, because I want everybody to wait sending their chat message until everybody has voted. And then you could spend, if you want, more than 1 vote. And you just denoted that by using asterisks. And as it's also said in the chat, 15% solution, something that you can start on now, not in a month. So really well put, Nils. And when everybody was saying, yes, I've prepared my voting. They clicked enter and send it to the chat, and then I would just go through the votes and figure out what was then the top 3. Then with this top 3, we had to form some groups. All groups must have an owner. That was just who has the most energy in this. They were the owner. They were not responsible for doing the work. They were just responsible for making sure that something happened. And that actually worked quite well. And just asking, anybody up for that? And then some people volunteered, and then the rest of them just, what initiative would you really like to be part of? And then we created the groups. Then we had a break, and now we were ready to actually start the working, because that was also part of these 3.5 hours to start working in these groups. And for that, I'm a big fan of purpose to practice. I have to admit, at first when I saw it, I was a bit like, yeah, it seems a bit strange wording, but to be honest, I've used it several times now, and I absolutely love the things that it forces you to discuss in your group. And purpose to practice is a spiral model like this, where it starts with a purpose and ends with practice, hence the name, purpose to practice. But first off, I had prepared a PowerPoint template in each of these breakout rooms for them, with all the information on purpose to practice, so they could just fill out the missing pieces, so to say. And the first one for this purpose was to them as a group. It could be, we want to be a more product-driven organization, or we want to focus more on upskilling, or whatever, right? So why is this initiative actually important to us and others? I often ask, so why is this the single most important thing since sliced bread? Why is this so important that I'm not even sure I can stop right now, because I just want to continue working on this specific issue? And when we have the purpose clear and everybody in the group agrees on this purpose, then we go through these principles. And these principles are, what rules do we need to follow in pursuit of our purpose? So are we using Socracy, or are we just working individually, or does everything need to be signed off by everybody in the group? And when these principles are written down, everybody agrees to them, we're ready to move on to the participants list. And yes, the participants are given at first, right? Because right now we are a group. But that might not be the participants we need over time. It might be that at some point we will pull in Carsten, or we might pull in Camilla, or whatever. And it might also be that the group right now is maybe not even the fixed group. This are just the group kicking it off, and then we need to pull in other resources, other people, or whatever it is later, to help us achieve this purpose that we set out to do. And again, writing it down makes it quite concrete for people, and also stage setting explicitly that it's okay that you're not the group for the long term, but you're kicking it off, and then have an idea of who will be participants down the line. Then we can take it from there. When we have these participants in place, then we go into the structure part of it. So how are we going to distribute control? And if you go to the Liberating Structures website, you'll also find more information about these prompts and what these means. But it's actually it's super nice. And then from this structure we go into the practices. So what is in it for our stakeholders? Again, how do we actually do this? And when we have that in place, everybody, all these small groups had a great pitch of the idea and had an idea of, so we have the structure in place. We will meet in 2 weeks time, and we will have prepared this, and then we can present in the next LT session in 2 months time, or whatever the timeline was. And in that way, people had 1 hour to fill out all of this, and then if possible start to work. And then, as I said, breakout. And since we had a lunch we had to plan for, I was bold enough, or stupid enough, or annoying enough to say that you have 1 hour, and in that hour, you also need to eat lunch. So some of them just decided we'll start off with lunch and then meet in 20 minutes and then spend the rest 40 minutes filling out the template and answering these questions. Some of them worked while eating. Again, the groups are much better at deciding that than I am. And one thing we then did at the end was to simply go back and then present to each other, have some candid feedback. So when you went out to this meeting room with this content, how did it go? Any reflections, any reactions, any things that you really think this group overlooked that should be inserted? Because there were, of course, some participants that really wanted to be in both groups, but since we cannot clone people just yet, that was not a possibility. So they had to pick exactly one group to be part of. And then at the end of the day, that was the last thing we presented, and then we revisited the best hopes, and then we did the feedback that I will get back to in not that long time, how we are going to do that. But what I would actually like us to spend the next period of time on is just some reflections. And since I said that the liberating structures, they're not that prescriptive, we can actually tweak it as we see fit. For instance, 1, 2 for all might be a bit difficult when we're 116 people. So we will do 1 for so all, and then with a popcorn theory, but I will get back to that. So I really want you individually and in silence, just spend 2 minutes in what is your biggest reflection or takeaway from this session with me yapping for 35 or 39 minutes or so. And then Patrick will hopefully press the magic button and send you into a breakout room when I give him the signal. And we will meet back here when you have been in the breakout rooms for 8 minutes or so. And then we will use the popcorn theory to hear from a couple of the groups. And as I said, what is your biggest takeaway from this session or liberating structures in general? And then Patrick, if you will press the button and send people off in a minute or so. And then you will have around 8 minutes.
Sorry, Carsten, it seems that we have a bit of a breakout room problem.
Okay.
Neither me or Mia have breakout rooms.
Oh,
well, we can't find them, so
no,
we have to innovate a bit.
Yeah, no, it's fine. So instead, I will just give you, not instead, I will still give you just maybe a bit more time, and then we'll use the popcorn theory soon to just hear a couple of reflections before we go to the questions.
So this was, if you wonder, this was arranged in beforehand to show how agile we are and thinking on our feet.
So I don't know if you're familiar with the popcorn theory, but I don't know if many of you has tried to make popcorn in the microwave. So when we make popcorn, some corns just pop sooner than the others. They simply cannot wait to turn into this almost godlike substance of a popcorn, right? And we are just going to use that fact here. So I hope that some of you is that popcorn that has, or this corn that is ready to turn into a popcorn, and just I so want to share what's on my mind. And some of you might pop a bit later. That's completely fine. Then just unmute or raise your hand. I think unmute is probably best, and just shout out what is your biggest takeaway. Then I will try to capture it as well as good as possible. Any wanting to share what's on their mind or comments? What is your biggest takeaway?
Gwenia from London. I think I love the introverts, involving introverts and those who don't speak much. You're using liberating structures. Thanks.
Yeah. And I completely agree, right? Because catering for those as well. It's super difficult, and especially within IT, at least in the teams I've been part of, knowing many computer scientists, many of them are introverts. So we need to make sure that they also have a voice. Thank you. Other takeaways or comments?
Yes, Marcel from Zurich. I like actually the purpose to practice example, because we had a similar approach in a project that I was involved to build up an agile team from different people from IT and business. And I think this is a good model. I think we built something similar, but this is a more concrete process, I think, to probably use for further like projects in this direction, yeah, to bring people together.
Cool.
Work on the same topic.
Yeah, and I completely agree. And at least when we have IT involved, some people, including myself, really like to have some kind of structure, so it's not just people talking and nothing really gets done. Thank you. It was a good case. Other reflections or comments?
We have one in the chat as well, Carsten, from Linda Stridsberg. She has some problems with her microphone. So 1, 2, 4 method to include all participants better. So is her takeaway.
Yeah.
It's Scott from Scotland. I love the 15% solution, and specifically how you defined it as continuous incremental change delivered without needing overtime, without needing to go looking for budget, and without sort of structural resistance. I think that's almost a key entry point to saying the output from the sessions will be based upon continuous improvement. So there has to be capacity for that. That's a takeaway from me.
And you should think that is that it's given, right? But it's not always. It's not our fault. It's always the other teams, right? That is wrong. But cool, really awesome input, Scott.
This is Jeroen from Rotterdam. I also agree with Scott, and also the hands-on mentality deriving from that 15% is really cool.
Yeah. Cool. Let's hear 1 or 2 popcorns more before going to the...
I have one.
Yeah.
From Denmark. I think that in general, it was just nice to see how we can put different liberating structures together, working as a facilitator. I think that was really interesting, and it just gave me an appetite for looking more into liberating structures.
Cool. Thank you.
But also really nice just with the concrete example. That's always good to see.
Yeah. I can say personally, at least for me, that was a difficult thing in the beginning, was to decipher what was on the web page, and then how do I actually use it in a real sentence and not just the description. It took me some time saying to myself, I can do this. Awesome. So my closing remarks before we go to questions is, I would really just urge you to just try them out. The 1, 2 for all, for instance, it's super simple, and it's just, I use it not all the time, but I use it quite a lot. So it's natural to use for me now, and it's a simple way to start. It's not far out as some of the others might seem at first. So it's just like try them and then see what people say about it. If it doesn't work for you, then it's also fine, of course. Then try out something else if you're up for it. And then one of my favorite sources of inspiration is the Liberators, Barry and Christian. They're producing some kick-ass content on liberating structures and a lot of other stuff. And I think it's especially Christian, which writes some playbooks, so to say, for different liberating structures on his blog on Medium, which I often use for inspiration on how to use these structures. So it's a gold nugget. It's super awesome content that they are doing. I've also made some YouTube videos on the different structures of 15% solutions, conversation cafe, 1, 2 for all, and liberating structures in general that you can find on my YouTube channel. I have made a playlist, I think, just called Liberating Structures. And then, as I said, just start simple and have fun. And to this fun aspect, this 1, 2, 4, right? It can work in very small groups. There is an unofficial liberating structure called Mad Hat, which is an awesome way of asking questions to a big group of people, where they're then just having smaller conversations. And there is a Mad Tea Party, Mad Love Tea Party also called, where I use that for a group of 190 people, asking 36 questions to fall in love. I did not, of course, tell people that those were the questions, but again, just as a fun icebreaker with 180 something people at the same time, it was super awesome. And liberating structure scales tremendously well. And then thanks quite a lot for taking the time to listen to me. And then questions or comments. And just 2 seconds. I will also in the chat post a link soon when I just get it copied for some feedback. And it's just a simple retrospective-ish board where you're more than welcome to write down comments to me and to the content and so on, because that's super valuable for value adding for me. Yeah, somebody said something.
We have some questions here from the chat first, maybe.
Yeah.
And first of all, thank you, Carsten, for the great presentation. And here's a question about what motivates you to share on LinkedIn so much great content.
I have several motives, to be honest. One thing is it forces me to stay up to date and learn new stuff. I'm quite curious, so I love to learn new stuff. And right now I'm pacing myself and have been doing so for 2.5 years almost to post a video every week. So that really forces me to have something to talk about every week. And I also, even though it sounds super hippie and maybe a bit naive, but I also just like to help people. And I found out that that is one way I can help people, is to share my learnings. So
yes, super great answer. And what tools are you using for this presentation?
I'm using my iPad and an app called GoodNotes. It could also be Notability or whatever. It's just a simple note-taking app.
Yes.
And yes, I will share the presentation as a PDF. I don't know how, but I will share it somewhere.
We can send it to me and I can send it out to all the participants or something.
Awesome.
I think
I will send you the PDF then.
Thank you. And then we have a question for the 1, 2, 4 all. You choose the times which apply for offline usage, but did you also add some time for changing the breakout rooms?
In 1, 2, 4 online, because I usually online, as I also was going to do here, is I do 1 and then 3 or 4 and then all, simply to not have people jump in between a lot of different meeting rooms. And that also means I take some of the times, for instance, if we skip the pair step, take those 2 minutes and then put to the group discussion, because it just takes extra time online.
Yeah. And then we have another question. I think it was brought up before, but we can do it again if someone missed it. It was, how do you manage the talking token object in remote situations?
I do it using different techniques. One thing is I can use a website like a Wheel of Names, which is like a Wheel of Fortune, where you can write in names. And then you just share your screen and then click, and then it spins, and then a name pops up, and that's the person that is now allowed to speak. It's super fun, and there's confetti and everything. Otherwise, I just simply have a piece of paper where I then cross out the names that have talked so far. And then if people are speaking, then I will be rude, so to say, and interrupt them, but I will, of course, try to time it at the end of the sentence.
Super good. And then we have the best hopes is the same as top expectations from the session.
Yes, I guess you can say that.
Yeah. And send us the slides. Yes, we will send people the slide. And Conversation Cafe, was it done in groups or whole team? And that's
normally a Conversation Cafe should be in a group of, I would say at most 7, 8 people. But we did it here because we were 8-10 people, so we did it in one big group. The risk with a too big of a group is that it will take quite a lot of time, and again we might have people hiding, but since this was one team, I went for just having it in one group.
Yes. So it depends is the answer.
Yes.
Yeah. So should choosing an owner from the conversation cafe always be spontaneous?
I think that's a bit that
in your opinion.
It depends.
Yeah.
If I like to facilitate a conversation cafe where I don't take part of the actual discussions. Otherwise, we would just self-organize again, and then anybody wants to do it. If not, then I, as a facilitator of the bigger group, will always say that if I cannot find a volunteer, I will find a voluntold. So I will just point to a specific person and say, "You're now voluntold to facilitate this discussion."
That's super. And how do you handle bosses grabbing the responsibility in conversation cafe?
It depends a bit. So if I know that they're likely to do that, I might have a chat with them up front. Otherwise, I will say that this is a structured format and the rules apply to everybody. So you have 1 minute, and I will have a timer that people can see. So it's not a surprise when the time runs out.
Yes. Okay. Yeah. And what's the purpose of having an owner for each group? Why not a team group ownership?
Since it's quite short time period, the idea of having an owner for a group is just making sure that we have one timekeeper and not 7 timekeepers with a phone.
Yeah. Okay. Good. And how do you ensure energy levels are high in meetings, especially now when when everyone is remote, or most of us are remote?
I am a big believer of icebreakers and energizers and stuff like that. So I would say having one of those at least every 45 minutes to keep energy up, or at least some kind of interaction, so it's not just one person talking or presenting the entire time.
Yes. And I can also share one thing there, but like if you're the presenter, just think that like 50% of your energy disappears in the screen. So be very, very vocal with your hands, and so you can give some of your energy to the participants as well. So
yeah.
And do you know if they have continued to work with what they decided in the workshop or after the workshop?
They did. So we did not end the session before we had agreed when were they going to follow up on this, because otherwise it would be just yet another workshop that led to nothing. So they followed up.
Super. Then we have the, do you have any minimum or maximum amount of liberating structures together in one session? They seem interesting, but they are easy to overdo maybe.
I'm quite pragmatic. That's also why I said that I could have done some kind of icebreaker using a liberating structure, but I just chose to do something else. And again, the minimum is 1. As I said, I often use 1, 2 for all, even in smaller meetings or something like that, again, to cater for different types of personalities. But we can also, if we have a full day workshop, we can actually get through quite a lot of structures, and some of them just blend together. So it's not really visible that we go from one structure to another structure.
Yes. Then we have one question here about the 1, 2 for all. When 2 people meet together in that technique, should those 2 people come to a consensus if they have conflicting thoughts, or they can just present both the different perspectives to the next level?
They don't need to align. They can have conflicting things, and that's also the important thing here, is that then you can check your opinion against another one in a smaller context compared to the entire group. Then that gives you some kind of preparedness to what you might face in the bigger group when you present, and that's super, super strong.
Yeah. And do you know about any like liberating structure meetups, if there are any online or
there is quite a lot, and again, the liberators, they are doing a lot of liberating structures user groups. So they exist around in different countries.
Yes, and I know there are some on meetup.com as well. So you can find a lot of them there. And how do you immunize big corporate teams who find liberating structures an alien concept at first?
I don't tell them that I'm going to use liberating structures. I just do it. So I just say that I have this this format, this workshop I would like to run with you, and we're going to do like this and this, and that will give you this or that. And I can cater for the different types of personalities. For them, I don't think they care if it's liberating structures or if it's something else. And I honestly don't either. I just want it to be a good, productive meeting. If it's liberating structures, cool. If it's not, then it's also fine.
Yeah.
Again.
So that's good. And do you have some string tactics for different meeting purposes or formats?
I think my biggest tactic is, again, being a bit pragmatic, but I really like the conversation cafe and that way of thinking to make sure that everybody is heard and everybody has time to reflect.
Yes. And do you have any additional recorded sessions for people who are new to liberating structures?
Not sessions. I have individual structures on my YouTube channel. I think that's the best I can think of. And
then we have one last question here. If people want to learn some more about liberating structures, do you have any books, courses, websites, or something you recommend?
Liberatingstructures.com, and then the Liberators. They have, I don't necessarily know, there are immersion workshops with liberating structures when the world opens up again around the globe.
Yeah.
Which are quite awesome, where you get not necessarily through all of them, but through a lot of different structures. Those are quite nice.
Super. And I have one tip as well. If you have an iPhone, I think I don't know if it's on Android, but there's a great app called Lisa, which you can download and play around with. And there's all the content are there really. So, and you can find everything about them. And you can string together different structures and everything in the app. So it's really
maybe
good.
You can add the name, Patrick, in the chat. People are asking for what the name of the app was.
Lisa.
Mm-hmm.
So thank you everyone for joining us, and thank you, Carsten, for being part of this great seminar on liberating structures. And now time for lunch, and there's 3 more weeks of Agile20Reflect seminars coming up, and we are hosting a bunch of them too. So thank you everyone, and we'll see you later.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you for
everyone.
great interaction in the chat as well. Lovely.
Bye.
Thank
So many
you.
questions. Just had time to answer some of them.
Yes.